Hellblade 2 has recently been released, and to say it has been divisive would be a massive understatement. Both among friends and critics I've seen everything from hateful dislike to indifference to absolute reverence. I've yet to play it myself, but since the first game is one of my all-time favorites, it has been quite nerve-wracking to see the response to the sequel. Regardless, with the release of Hellblade 2, I think now is a perfect time to look back on that first game and look what made it so special. While there's definitely justified criticism towards the gameplay of Hellblade, it still offers an experience you cannot get anywhere else, really. Everyone who has played it or has even heard of it generally knows what makes it so special, right? Its incorporation of psychosis into every facet of its design. But it's actually more unique still than you might think, far more unique actually, opening up a new way to think about the role we take on when we play video games. How does it do that? How could it be even more unique than simulating psychosis? Well, the answer lies in one key aspect: perspectives. Let me show you what I mean.
I see you somehow. Focus.
Why go on? When you give everything in face that which torments you, only to find that it is worse than you could have imagined. So I go on. Is it really so weak to ask this?
To those who've stumbled upon this video but have never even heard of Hellblade before, it's an action-adventure game consisting of linear exploration, combat and visual puzzles, and it follows the character of Senua on her quest to revive her dead husband Dillion, to bring him back from the dead, from the land of the dead, from the Norse world of Helheim. A major part of what makes it so special is, as I've already said, its incorporation of psychosis into the experience. Senua suffers from it, and it not only distorts the physical world around her, it also makes her hear voices in her head all the time, commenting on every little thing she does, on any danger that might befall her, or just plain berating her and driving her crazy, essentially. As anyone who has played this game can attest to, it's a very oppressive experience because you, as a player, also get to hear these voices in your head when you play with headphones, and you also witness the same distorted reality as Senua. Since it follows conventions from other action-adventure games, with its third-person perspective, camera sitting behind the back, and its gameplay elements, like the combat and visual puzzles, it's easy to think that you're actually embodying Senua in this game, that you are her. But here's the thing, you're not. Or at least, not quite. Yes, the gameplay actions that you take are directly tied to her, but are you taking her visual perspective too? Not quite, because actually, there are multiple perspectives here. To explain this, I need to get a bit theoretical. The German game studies scholar Britta Neitzel made a distinction between the point of view and the point of action. These terms are rather intuitive, I think, the former implying the visual perspective and the latter implying from which point in the game you actually carry out actions. The point of action, or POA for short, is quite clear in Hellblade. It's Senua. Every input on your controller, keyboard or mouse is directly and immediately carried out by Senua. With the point of view, or POV for short, it's not that simple. To understand why, listen close to what one of the main voices in To understand why, listen close to what one of the voices in Senua's head says right at the start of the game.
Hello? Who are you? Doesn't matter. Welcome. You're safe with me. I'll be right here, nice and close so I can speak without alerting the others.
What she is saying is quite clear. You, the player, or rather the POV that you take, is actually another voice inside Henua. Why do I keep saying Henua? You, the player, or rather the visual perspective that you assume, is one of the voices in Senua's head. Traditionally, in comparable games like this, such as A Plague Tale or The Last of Us, third-person action-adventure games, you naturally start to feel like you're actually looking through the character's eyes, that you are the character that you're controlling, even though the camera is sitting back, even though you're seeing the character from outside. Through fourth wall breaks like this, Hellblade sets itself apart. There are two POVs here. One, of course, is the traditional third-person perspective, or as Knights likes to call it, semi-subjective perspective, which is tied to Senua. The second POV then is a first-person perspective, or as Knights likes to call it, subjective perspective, which is tied to the actual camera. This doubled perspective has a bunch of implications. First of all, the very fact that this is the case hammers home the fragmented state of Senua's mind. Doubling the POV while staying with a single POA is a disorienting mix, but it is one that works perfectly to capture her mental state. How, despite living in a single body, there are many different perspectives and voices lurking in her mind. A second implication that goes into kind of meta-level territory is this. If we assume that this subjective perspective is actually a representation of another voice inside Senua's head, even though the camera is technically outside of her, that makes us, the player, assume the role of a voice inside Senua's head. The voices are also constantly telling her what to do, and if we go with this kind of train of thought, then technically we are another voice inside her head telling her what to do, literally, by our gameplay actions. We are telling Senua what to do, we are one of the voices in her head. This next part is going to be spoiler filled, so if you don't want to see or hear that, just skip ahead to a timestamp on the screen or via the chapter selection. Ready? Alright.
Truth? Anyone?
There is no one here but me.
Not you.
Did you think that I would let you go? That you lost me back in the wilds? I will never let you go. You can't get rid of me. I am your shadow.
At certain points in the game, Senua looks and speaks directly to the camera. Sometimes the subjective POV is empty then. She's essentially looking and speaking directly to you, a voiceless voice in her head, if you will. But at other times there's an actual voice and character attached to this POV that Senua talks to. Her shadow, for example, an echo of her abusive father. This hammers home how many different voices and perspectives there are in Senua's head again. It's a seamless change too, even though it only happens in cutscenes. Then there are also times where the shadow isn't represented by the subjective POV, but actually visible and talking directly to the camera. It can get quite confusing to think about all of this. What we can say for sure though is that this game constantly messes with a fragmentation of this subjective POV and constantly switching between possible perspectives, which are all part of Senua's mind still. I think we also need to take a look at the final battle of this game. The people who've played it seem to be split on it, with some people straight up hating it, hating the idea of an endless fight that you have to lose. But what is actually happening with the perspectives here? The POA is the same as before. You control Senua, you're making a fight and move on. But the only way to actually move on is to let go of his POA here, to stop fighting, to stop controlling Senua. I think this is the point in the game where you might feel the most empathy with Senua, most in line with her way of thinking. It is, however, also a point in the game that requires the most distance. Because of what the game and the genre in general have conditioned us to think, we expect to be able to win this fight, but we simply can't. In the fight itself, this double POV point of view doesn't really matter. It's really more about the fact that you're controlling Senua as a point of action, I think, of the most interesting part of it. And it's arguably the moment also in the game where the POV is the most traditional. You're more expected to feel like you actually are Senua, not just in your actions, but also in your mindset. Though then also expected to break that connection. This is reinforced with a post-fight cutscene where the camera shifts towards a subjective perspective of Hela, with Senua talking directly to the camera. And when Hela stabs Senua, it feels a bit like you're the one who's killing her. Of course, this is all just in her mind, but it's effective. This is all a bit convoluted, I know that, and I might be reaching a bit far with some of these thoughts, but I think it's just interesting to think about how moments like this play with perspective in Hellblade.
It's not too late to get into the boat and go back. No one will judge her. No one will ever know.
I know you want to. No.
Oh, she heard us.
She's not going back. She's not going.
There's no going back.
Lastly, and much less obscurely, this doubled Perspective also makes the experience quite intimate. Whenever the game breaks the fourth wall, either by directly addressing you verbally or when Senua looks directly into the camera, it doesn't bring down the illusion of this experience, like fourth wall breaks often do. The opposite, in fact. Since the subjective perspective is treated right away as a part of the world, it never feels jarring, except maybe the very last line in the game, but I won't spoil it here. But if you know, you know. But imagine if, say, in The Last of Us, Joel suddenly turned around and spoke directly to the camera. Now that would be very jarring, right? But in Hellblade, because of the central aspect of psychosis and how these POVs are actively constructed, it's not jarring at all. It doesn't shatter the immersion, it only enhances it. There's one more aspect in which Hellblade makes a unique use of its perspective structure. All throughout the game there are these puzzles where there are runes that you have to find in the environment and focus the camera on them. What you have to do then is find the right position and perspective on certain objects in the world that upon closer look have the same shape as the runes you're looking for. When you focus the camera on them, the actual camera zooms in directly into Senua and kind of merges these two perspectives together into one. You have to see the world as she does in order to progress in the game. In theory, this creates even more empathy towards Senua. This train of thought does have one counterpoint though. You don't really have a choice. You don't have a choice whether or not to put yourself into Senua's shoes, or well, into her eyes, technically. If you want to progress in the game, you have to do these puzzles, merge the two perspectives to solve them. You also have to find the exact right rune in the exact right position and perspective. There's no option to find other shapes in the world that look like the runes. There's just one solution. So in the end, it doesn't require empathy. It's just about finding the right spot that the game wants you to find. But it's a cool idea nonetheless, and one that is necessarily restricted by the nature of how the game works, but that also still resonates with the themes of the game.
Another voice joins us. She once tried to make them go away. Pretend they weren't real. But what good is that? When we are always here.
If we just stay with the visual perspective that Hellblade presents, it is remarkably unique and clever. I don't mean to imply that Hellblade is the only game ever to do interesting things with perspectives. It's not, but in this genre, I think it's definitely unique. Very unique. It calls into question how we perceive perspectives in other games of this genre, where we never question if we actually are the character we see from an outside perspective. In general, this is practically the only game I know of where fourth wall breaks only increase the immersion in the game world, in the fictional world, instead of disrupting it. For these reasons, among many others, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is not only an incredibly unique game, but a very important game that more people should experience. And it's a shame that the sequel is kind of disrupting this, the legacy of the first game in a way, just through the division that it has caused. I cannot speak on the sequel yet, whether it doubles down on the strengths of the first game or fails to live up to it, but I hope that we don't lose sight of the achievement of the original game. If you're by any chance curious what I'm playing at the moment, what I've played in the past, ratings I've given, or reviews I've written up, I've got a Backloggd account which I've linked down in the description below. The same goes for movies and Letterboxd. It has been over a month since my last video, even though I promised to upload a new video every 2 or even 3 weeks. I'm sorry. Through some personal circumstances I haven't been able to work on videos as much as I wanted or planned to, and I cannot guarantee that this will change anytime soon, but as long as I have ideas I'm passionate about, like this one, I am going to continue making these videos. And yeah, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time as well. Bye.